Welcome to the third part of my Lima Mk2 coach makeover, where I'll be making the finishing touches, improving the glazing and adding some passengers. In the previous films, I made a replacement 3D printed interior and fitted lighting to show that off, but now I want to complete the project with the addition of some little people, bringing that illuminated interior to life. But first let's sort out the windows, replacing the old ones so we can see in better. We saw in part 1 that the roof and glazing are one unit, so we're going to have to separate them, cutting above the windows. And to make sure I know where to cut, I'm marking the top frames with a scratch of a scalpel, much more precise than even the finest of pens, with less risk of marking the inside of the frame. Then it's out with the existing glazing unit, a firm twist of the body, opening up a gap at the end of the roof, where we can get a thumbnail in to release the clip and lift the whole thing out. If you're picking up this series here, you'll have missed that I removed the side clips from the glazing in the previous video, when replacing the interior with my 3D printed one. This makes it slightly easier to get out, but the method is much the same whatever. Now we can see my scratch marks, and to make them a little bit clearer, I'm marking above with a Sharpie pen, about 1.5 millimeters away. This will give us enough space for the top of our glazing, while leaving enough of a lip on the bottom of the roof where it fits into the coach. A strip of masking tape marking where we're going to cut. Any excess simply torn away. The plastic of the moulding is quite thick, so I'm going to need to use my razor saw for the cut. In itself not difficult, just a little bit awkward to get everything firmly clamped in place, while leaving the cut line accessible. It can also be quite brittle, prone to cracking along the roof line, so don't over-tighten your clamp. Then it's on with the sawing itself, using the edge of the masking tape as a guide, and keeping the saw at a shallow angle, so the end of the blade doesn't jam into our cutting mat, or hit the top of the clamp. The edge of the tape is generally easier to follow than a drawn line, but you'll notice that I have wavered a little, although not enough to be a problem. Then it's on to the other side, which I've taped in the same way. This time we're going to have to find another way to support the edge, and I've got a strip of wood clamped between the windows and my surface, the roof itself sticking out over my table edge. Again, we don't want to over-tighten, just enough to hold everything in place while we do the sawing, running along the edge of the masking tape, which this time I've managed not to stray away from. Halfway down we need to move our clamp to the other end, and tighten it up on the bit we've already cut, clearing the path for our saw, so we can get right to the end of our glazing, and finish removing the roof, which will need a clean up along the cut edges. One of the last things I did in my lighting video was line the inside of the roof with some electrical tape, so the light didn't show through any blemishes in the paintwork, or creep out between roof and windows, and I'm going to take this opportunity to replace it, getting a neater fit along the edges, and for that they need a good tidy up. First removing the rough burr from the sides of the cut, gently running a scalpel blade along the length of the roof, both on the outside and the inside, repeating until the edges are reasonably smooth. Then we can sand the bottom on some fine emery paper. This should remove the rest of the burr from the sides and smooth off the cut face. Then repeat as much as necessary, a bit of smoothing, a bit of shaving, until we've got a nice smooth surface. It doesn't have to be perfect, no one's going to see it after all. Then with any dust from the sanding wiped away, we can retape the inner surface. Much easier now the sides are removed. One thing I have tried in the past is lining the roof with aluminium foil, both to block the light getting out and to reflect it back into the interior, my thinking being that it would improve the diffused lighting. But at the end of the day I didn't reckon it made much difference, so just the black tape it is, folding it in over the lip where it will stop any light creeping out along the edge of the roof. As well as being fully opaque, the tape is stretchy enough to fit around any lumps and bumps of the inside of the roof, and when pressed in around those, we can give it a trim so it's flush with the edge of my plastic, both along the sides and at the ends, just shaping around the clips, ready for a test fit. If you were thinking of repainting the roof, now would be a great time to do it, and as we don't have to worry about the windows anymore, we don't even need to do any masking. The paint can cover that side strip. Now with the old glazing removed, we can get on with fitting our new windows. But before the flush glazing proper, I just want to share a quick win solution. A strip of clear acetate, just wider than the depth of the windows, simply stuck inside. My thin sheet, bought at a regular stationery store, being much better than the original thick Lima glazing. Obviously this doesn't address the depth of the window recess itself, but does go a long way to improving how well we can see inside, and couldn't be simpler to do. Just measure up the windows and cut a strip slightly wider, ready to be glued inside, our old glazing out of the way. It can even be temporary, and later replaced by the full flush glazing if we want. Of this set of 3 videos, it would probably have made more sense to do this one first, before the 3D printed interior or the lighting, both of which get in the way of fitting the windows. The seats come out easy enough, but rather than unsoldering my lighting strip to remove it completely, I can just keep it out of the way along the coach floor, held in place with some blobs of white tack, while we get on with the gluing. For this I'm going to use some stuff called glue and glaze, specially formulated for this kind of thing. It's much nicer to work with than superglue, and more forgiving. You don't have to get it exactly right first time. And it dries completely clear, so we don't have to worry about a little bit coming out the edges. And with 2 small dots in between each window, we can fit our acetate strip, carefully lining up along the top of the frames, overlapping a tiny bit. Whilst there is some wiggle room for readjustment, it's good if we can get our positioning as accurate as possible, so our glue doesn't get where we don't want it to be. But by only using a small amount, and keeping it well away from the edges of the frames, the risk of it showing are minimised. Then it's on to the other side, repeating the process as before. Of course you don't have to do the full length in one go, and fitting in sections does make lining up a little easier. Just remember to leave a little gap in between each one, as we don't want the acetate overlapping, preventing it from lying flat against the inside of the frame. If you are viewing this as a temporary solution, our glue and glaze has another advantage. The bond is certainly strong enough to hold everything in place, but relatively easy to break, should you want to remove the acetate later. But even if that is our plan, we've got one last job: frosting the toilet windows. And for this I'm using some little bits of self-adhesive film, offcuts from when I did my real-life windows, and applied in the same way. I covered this more fully in video 1 of the series, but other than being quite fiddly, it's quite straightforward. The hardest thing being removing the backing sheet, before spraying both surfaces with a little bit of water, so we can slide our film into place. And when we're happy with the position, squeegee out any bubbles with a little bit of plastic card, then drying out with kitchen towel, making sure there's no water on our electrics. Then with the other end done and everything completely dry, glue and frosting, we can put it all back together again, fishing out our little bits of white tack before replacing our 3D printed interior, with a quick reminder that the STL files for that and a growing range of other Lima interiors are available to download from my website. Direct link in the description. Then it's back in with the lighting and back on with the roof, clicking those end clips into place, which will be more than enough to hold it there. And I think you'll agree my simple solution is an immediate improvement on those thick old Lima windows. But we still haven't addressed the deep recesses, so time for the full flush glaze treatment. And for that I've got some vacuum formed windows from South Eastern Finecast, designed specifically for the Lima Mk2s. They have a whole range for retrofitting in various locos and coaches, and whilst by no means perfect, they are pretty much the only product filling this particular gap in the market. In my pack I get some rudimentary instructions, mostly about how to get the roof and the old glazing out, and 3 sheets of vacuum formed plastic, the contents and the packaging having a pleasing cottage industry vibe. For fitting I've lined up another coach, so we can compare the results with the quick fix solution. And I've already separated windows and roof, lining that with tape for light insulation. So with coach at the ready, let's have a look at what we've got. Each sheet has a set of separate windows. In this case I've got 6 of the main ones, plus singles for toilets and doors, and also ones for a brake coach, the packs being the same for all the Mk2s in the range. My third sheet is laid out slightly differently, but I seem to have the same number of each type of window, plus some for the coach end doors, although the moulding for those isn't that great, so I may give them a skip. The windows fit from the inside of the coach, and it would be great if it was just a case of sticking them in, but sadly it's not as simple as that, and as the instructions warn, we are going to have to do quite a bit of work on the frames, and to demonstrate what's involved, let's cut out the first of our windows, trimming them close to the edge with a stout pair of scissors, leaving about 1.5mm all round. This doesn't have to be super precise, as the edges won't really be visible. Offering up the window to the frame, we can immediately see the problem. It's the right size for the outside of the coach, but the frames taper inwards, so the back is narrower. This is very much part of the Lima design, ideal for the original glazing unit, not so good for ours. All that the instructions say is that it's necessary to remove a certain amount of the plastic, not so much how. So let me share some of my techniques, starting with filing, and sensing a bit of a job ahead, I've treated myself to a new set of needle files, with a whole range of profiles, the smallest round one being good for the outer corners. The most important thing to remember here is always to angle the file inwards. We only want to take the plastic from the inside edge of the frame, leaving the outer unscathed. Next, a flat file for the straight edge of the bottom of the frame, and you can start to see where the plastic has been removed. Just from the inside edge, the outer left well alone, gradually reversing that taper, so the back of the frame is very slightly wider than the front. And when we're happy with the bottom, we can go on to the sides. Again, always angling the file into the inside of the frame, removing the plastic at the back, never the front. Then we need to do the same for the bottom of the glazing bar, so all 4 sides of the main window frame are no longer tapered, and if anything, slant outwards rather than inwards. Then with a quick tidy up all round, it's time to find out if we've taken out enough. As yet I haven't touched the top windows, so I'm not expecting the full unit to fit, but it's clear that the gap between the top and bottom is too wide, and indeed some of the sets don't even line up, so it looks like we're going to have to install the windows separately, cutting between the main window and the top panes. And with those out of the way, we can see that we have removed enough plastic for a nice snug fit. Now it's time for a quick side quest. I'd thought these black marks were damage to the paint, the plastic showing through, but I now know that that's pale grey, so it's something on top, and with some very careful scraping I should be able to get it off, touching up any remaining bits with matching paint. That done, it's on with filing the upper frames, in exactly the same way as the main windows, just using smaller files. Again, always remembering to angle inwards, removing the plastic from inside the back of the frame, particularly important on the vent windows, where any thinning of the glazing bar fronts would be particularly noticeable. We also need to take care not to take too much out from the backs of the bars, or the bars themselves might snap. The task is quite laborious, but at least we've only got short sides, and it doesn't take that long to get the windows to fit, pressing gently in from the inside. If they don't quite fit, don't force them, just go in and file a bit more off where they're snagging. Our window frames are now the right size, but they are a bit rough, so I want to give them a bit of a sand. And for this I'm making a little paddle, a piece of fine emery paper, glued to a wooden skewer, the kind you might find stuck in a club sandwich, or cheese and pineapple cocktail snack. The wide end of the stick is great for the top and the bottom, and a thin bit of paper glued to the narrow bit, perfect for getting into the sides of the main window, and also the little ones at the top. The frames will be visible through the edges of the glazing, so it's worth spending a little time on this. And when you're done, give everything a good brush down, to get rid of any dust before gluing. We're going to be using our glue and glaze again, only this time not directly out of the bottle, as we're going to need to be much more precise. Instead, using a fine brush to apply it around the outside of the window, painting along the lip of the frame we left behind when cutting out. It doesn't matter if a little bit of glue gets on the sides of the windows as well, that'll just stick to the insides of the frame, becoming clear when the glue dries. But we do want to avoid getting it on the face, as that would show. And the reason I've chosen the fiddly option of applying the glue to the window rather than the frame is that it's nearly impossible to insert it into a gluey surround without some smearing onto the front. Then with glue all round we can push the window into the frame, making sure we get it the right way up. And if all our filing and sanding has gone to plan, it should press flat against the inside of the body, where it can be held for a minute or so with the fingertip while the glue starts to set. And when it's fully dry, any that's crept inside the frame will go clear and virtually disappear. Then it's on to the top windows, and while it may seem a faff to fit these separately, it does actually make life easier. The process is the same, a thin bead of glue all the way round the window. Don't bother with the gaps between, they can just push in behind the glazing bars unglued, reducing the risk of sullying the surface. If any does get where it shouldn't be, just pause and clean the whole thing with water, starting again when dry. You can of course use tweezers, both to hold onto the edges when gluing and positioning the window for insertion, before pressing home with a fingertip. Then making sure the rim is flat against the inside of the body all the way round, we can leave our glue to dry. 1 down, 15 to go, plus the toilets and doors. Of course fitting them one at a time would be nuts, but now I've demonstrated the method we can get a bit of a production line going, filing all the remaining frames down that side, and sanding ready for the windows. This is always going to be pretty laborious, but once you get a rhythm going it doesn't take that long, and after about an hour, with a final scrape to remove any remaining burr, we're ready for those windows, trimming out 7 more from the glazing sheets. I don't know much about the history of South Eastern Finecast, or who was behind the original mouldings, but they seem to have been around for donkey's years, and the production techniques are perhaps showing their age, but still very much fit for purpose, providing a cheap, if somewhat labour-intensive enhancement to our old Lima coaches, as well as many locos of a similar vintage. You can see how I fitted them to a Hornby Class 37 in the link above. Much the same deal as here, but with far fewer windows. But back to the job in hand, and I've got all the trimmed glazing laid out on my cutting mat, arranged in the pairs as I cut them out, ready for gluing, using exactly the same method as the first window. Like the filing, this is time consuming, but at least you get the chance to see the fruits of your labour along the way, gradually building up window by window. But it's still quite a task, requiring patience and concentration to keep the glue round the edges only, and not to creep onto the front surface, neither during application nor when fitting into the frame. As well as on the windows themselves, the glue in your saucer will be drying out as you go, so you will need to refresh this to keep it fluid and brushable. How often just depends on how quick you are, but I recommend taking your time, adopting a Zen-like approach, and trying to enjoy the repetitive nature of the task as much as is possible. Then, before you know it, you'll be onto the last window, at least the last of the main ones on this side. I reckon that took me about an hour and a half for filing and fitting, so you could do a whole coach in about a morning, but my stamina doesn't stretch that far, so I'll be taking a break, giving the glue time to dry before creating any more filing dust. Then, thanks to the magic of editing, it's the following day, and all the main windows are now fitted and the glue thoroughly dry, so just the toilets and the door windows to do. The main bits of those are straightforward enough, but the little ones either side of the toilet vents prove a bit more challenging. Even the smallest of my files struggling to make any impact of the back of the frames without damaging the fronts. So time for a bit of judicious fettling with the tip of my scalpel blade, gradually flaking away the plastic from either side of the vent and the outer edges of the frame, being very careful not to slice any off the front. This actually leaves the sides nice and smooth, which is just as well because there's no way I'm getting my emery board paddle in there, although it's fine for the other bits. Then, with everything smooth and all the dust and flaking swept away, we can get on with fitting the windows. Like the main ones, we have a few more door windows than we actually need, at least we do for a standard coach like ours. But when we get onto our brake coach, we'll be needing a total of 8, 2 more than are in the packet, so we'll have to set aside our spares for that when we get to it. Test fitting done, we come to the loo windows, and probably the most challenging part of the job. After our experience with the main windows, it's probably no surprise that they don't fit in one unit, and I'm already expecting to have to separate top and bottom, trimming the edges to avoid any chance of overlap, but I had thought the top two would be the right distance apart. They're not out by much, but enough to be squished out of shape if we try and fit them together, the plastic seeming to be particularly thin due to their small size, so we're going to have to snip them apart, trim them down a bit, and fit separately. And it's just as well we've got several spares, as I'm almost certain to mess at least one up during fitting. This time I am going to apply the glue to the inside of the body, the flip side of having to fit them one at a time, being that they will be easier to line up individually, although using tweezers is really a must to avoid getting any glue on the fronts, and try not to get any glue on your fingertips when pushing them home. One last thing to remember is to only use the one you've test fitted in that hole, and to get them the same way up. Then they won't distort. The only bonus of this palaver is that it makes the fitting of the main toilet window seem like a doddle, although we do still need to remember to get that the right way up. And for the doors, we don't even need to worry about that, the only challenge being to get your fingers into the confined space at the end of the coach. Otherwise, easy peasy. The final task for the glazing is frosting the toilet windows, and I'm going to use my self-adhesive film again, making sure I've got rid of any dust from the insides. The instructions suggest painting the windows, but any irregularities are going to show up with my lighting, so I really need something with more even coverage, like the translucent film. The only problem is fitting it to what is far from a flat surface, and rather than using the standard method of applying it directly to the face of the window, I've decided to fix it inside the frame. As it won't actually be touching the surface, we can do this dry, without the need of the water spray, just pressing against the rim of the window. There's obviously a gap between window and sticky side of the film, so we want to seal the frame as well as possible, so no dust gets back in. Then the same for the window at the other end. And that's our flush glazing complete. As I said before, I won't be doing those corridor connector windows. I think we can live without them. So it's back in with my interior, which even though it's designed for the original Lima glazing, still fits fine. And back in with the lights, and back on with the roof. The lip along the edge fitting above the frames of our windows, now lovely and flush with the body sides. So let's compare our two solutions. The simple acetate strip, quick and easy, is definitely an improvement on the thick old Lima original, but the full flush glazing takes it to a different level. Obviously a great deal more work, but along with the lighting and the interior has totally transformed our model, which we can finish off by adding some passengers. Like everything else in this project, I'm going for maximum effect with minimum cost, and just £8 has got me 60 little figures. I could spend much more on some branded ones. The quality, particularly of the paint, would undoubtedly be better, but I could easily spend 3 times what I paid for the coach in the first place. So to get anything like a significant coach load, I'm going to do the best I can with these. They're obviously really quite basic, but there are some quite nice poses, and even though I've got 5 or 6 of each, a good variety, and I should be able to spread them around in my coach without too obvious a repetition. In theory, they're also the wrong scale, HO rather than 00. If they were standing, this would perhaps be more evident, but seated, even the smallest don't look out of place, and fit nicely without having to chop their legs off. But as we can clearly see, their big weakness is the paintwork, and that's what we're going to address now, sitting each on a little pedestal I've 3D printed, ready for painting. I reckon you need around 15 to 20 passengers per coach, which is a lot to paint in one go, so I prefer to batch up, doing 7 or 8 at a time, spaced out between other modelling jobs, so it doesn't feel too much of a grind. And of course we can reuse the pedestals once this particular set has dried, which won't take long with the acrylic paints I'm using. And I've opted for tubes rather than tinlets to make colour mixing easier, as I want each of my figures to be slightly different. You can clearly see how the 5 or 6 colours the factory has makes everything look the same, even if they're painted onto different figures. The colours I'll be using are also much more muted. I can't actually remember the last time I saw somebody in a bright yellow raincoat, let alone 2. And even in the 80s, the period of my Mark II coach, a scarlet dress being something of a rarity. I can also use this opportunity to introduce a bit more diversity, much more accurately reflecting the population of the time, with a whole range of skin tones, mixing them almost individually person to person. The painting itself doesn't have to be super realistic, although I think I can do better than the factory. And at this stage, it doesn't matter if we go over the edges, we can refine those later. But as a general rule, it's better to do the light bits first, painting over with the darker colours later. A nice thing to do is start thinking about the stories behind your people, imagining their history and their characters. Not only does this help keep boredom at bay, during what is a bit of a repetitive process, it helps inform what they will be wearing and what colour to paint their clothes. I'm imagining this young chap is out to impress in his damson suit, perhaps a job interview, or maybe he's in a ska band, on his way to a gig, but either way we want to ensure he's got a nice crisp edge to his jacket collar. The factory painting of the hair is a particularly weak point, just a black blob on the top of the head, and that's another opportunity for us to mix it up, not only in hair colour, but styles. And not forgetting accessories, like bags and shoes, although they'll be mostly hidden by the tables. The level of detail is largely up to you, but you don't have to go overboard, as they will be behind the windows of what's most likely a moving train. Then after what for me was 3 batches, it's time to fit my painted passengers, distributing them around the coach. Quite a few still had the blobs of white tack from when they were painted, so I can stick those straight in. Others needed a bit more adding, or a new piece altogether. I'd thought as they were under scale, a little cushion wouldn't do any harm in giving them a bit of extra height, but at the end of the day I ended up gluing them directly to the seats. But it was useful to test my arrangement before sticking permanently. Even though when painted any duplicates looked quite different, I wanted to keep them apart and have them facing different directions if at all possible, although I'm sure nobody would notice even if they were sitting side by side. Some of the poses seem to lend themselves to more particular places. She'll be good for the single seat at the end of the coach, where she can lean against the window undisturbed. Others can be positioned for more narrative purposes. Perhaps these 2 women are work colleagues, travelling home together from the office, or old friends who've met on the train purely by coincidence. And families too, a mother and her teenage daughters, making up a group of 3, so we don't have too regular a distribution. And you don't have to fill every bay. Perhaps another family got off at the last station. In the end I used a total of 22 figures, which seems about right for a fairly busy coach. So I've easily got enough left for 2 more, especially as any first-class carriages would be more sparsely occupied. Even without the lights, the flush glazing and passengers look really good, but on the test track they look even better. Certainly worth all that effort, filing down the window frames, fiddling with the frosting film, and paying attention to the individual little details of our passenger figures. But there's one last thing I want to do, which I think will really complete the job, and that's to add some no smoking signs to our windows, for which I'll be using Fox transfers. I'll pop the links to all the suppliers in the description. To save on postage, I've also ordered some first class signs for both the Mark IIs and some Mark Is, along with the classic triangular no smoking signs, but it's the circular ones we want here, and with 70 on our little sheet we've got more than enough for several coaches. Application is like any other water slide transfer. Sniff out your decal from the sheet and lower carefully into some water, where you can let it float for a while. When you think it's ready, just float it up to the edge of the saucer, testing that it's free from the backing sheet with a soft paintbrush, then transferring to our model, carefully lifting complete with the sheet. Then we can slide it onto the window, guiding it with the paintbrush into the right position, at the top of the window, underneath the vent, the glazing bars making it easy to centre. And when you're happy, dab it into place with a cotton bud. Like everything else in this project, we've got to do the same thing for all of the windows, but I soon got my production line sorted, putting the next one into soak as soon as I got each one out, ready to apply when the first is in position. So it didn't take long to do all 16, and with the final one dabbed into place, that really is the job complete. Not just for this video, but the whole makeover. And if you've got an old Lima languishing in your loft, or spot a bargain on eBay, I hope you've been inspired to try out some of the things for yourself. At least give the acetate windows a go. That's super easy, and in itself a massive improvement.